Welcome into the Gig'em 24/7 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined as always by Carter Carls. We're here to kind of take a look at where this A&M roster stands post spring. Going to talk about some areas that are good, some areas that still need some work. Focusing mostly on the defensive side of the ball today, and then we'll get into the offensive side next week. Carter, how you been?
Good man, good man. It's May, so we're past the draft, we're past spring football. Kind of the time we're like, man, what are we doing now? What are we doing? But there's still a lot of good things to cover, and we got a lot of stuff on Gig'em 247, and yeah, we got a lot to talk about. You've been on vacation. You were in
I
Italy,
know,
sending me. You were at the Leaning Tower of Pisa, so you've been already having a way more fun summer than I have. So I'm kind
I
of jealous.
I know, getting back in the groove now. Went to kind of toured Italy a little bit, and yeah, did go see the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Went to Catania. Um, Now back into it. I've been hitting the road this week, hitting a lot of schools and spring practice, and they're heating up. They're hitting about the midway point now. I was just talking with some folks yesterday about this, how quickly things go. Like, we're into May, like you said. We're going now. Like, SEC Media Day credentials are starting to flow in now. That's about 2 months away, and official visits are heating up. So it's going to be a fun summer, and things are kind of heating up. And speaking of heating up, A&M's kind of been heating up a little bit in the transfer portal. We've been talking about it now for a little while, and A&M's got some good news since the spring ended, with adding two guys on the defensive side of the ball in Boston College transfer Joshua DeBerry and Jackson State linebacker transfer Juriente Davis. What's kind of your thoughts on what A&M's done on that side of the ball?
Yeah, it's just what the doctor ordered, right? You really went into this spring portal cycle and thought, okay, four positions really: offensive tackle, wide receiver, linebacker, cornerback. Those were really the positions worth addressing. And on defense, they're not quite done, I don't think, adding or at least looking at guys on the defensive side of the ball. But they've got two guys that they really like at linebacker. JD Davis, it's Juriente, JD, whatever you want to call him. I'll
Mhm.
call him JD. And then, Josh DeBerry at cornerback. And, Josh DeBerry was somebody who immediately was interested in A&M from the moment they offered him. Really wasn't a close second in that recruitment. It was the only school that he visited during the process, and it was a big catch for A&M, being a three-time All-ACC corner at Boston College. I'm very fascinated to see what his career looks like, or what his 1 year looks like at A&M, because you know it really says something that this guy was able to stand out on such a terrible team. Like, usually, if
Yeah.
everyone around you on your defense is horrible, it doesn't matter how good you are, you're not going to be making a lot of plays. If you're a corner and you've got no pass rush, kind of hard to hold on for that long and not give up big plays. So for this guy to kind of do what he did, I'd like to see him in this defense that's got, a lot of way better players on it, a way better defensive line. And that's kind of what he told me during the process, was like, hey, man, this defensive line, I was at the spring game. My goodness. That's kind of what he told me. That was the first thing that stood out to him was, okay, if I'm playing behind Walter Nolen and Shamar Stewart and Turner and all these guys, it's like, okay, yeah, probably going to be a little bit easier to hang on and cover. Now, Juriente Davis, JD Davis, the thing with him is he's kind of bounced around. Obviously, Jackson State, he was at junior college, Middle Tennessee State, got 1 year left as well. But the thing with him, it's hard to kind of judge just how good he is. I feel like we won't really know until he sees the field. You watch his Jackson State tape, and he's a guy that flew all around the field, looked like a sideline to sideline kind of linebacker. Certainly was a guy that would come off the edge and blitz and do things like that and shoot the gaps. But is a little bit on the smaller side. So can he be an SEC linebacker that can withstand a beating? I know we talked about playing in the middle linebacker, but at the very least, I think you like the depth that you have in him because you had Edgerrin Cooper and Chris Russell as your starters going into the spring. And then after that, it was like, man, their backups are true freshmen and Damian Sanford, Tari, and York. You like what you've seen from them so far, but you're still saying, okay, these guys are what 17 years old. Like
Yeah.
this should be their prom right now that they're going to this month. So it's you feel better about that depth. Josh DeBerry as well, that depth with him. Maybe he's not a starter. We'll see, but at the very least, they have some insurance if there are some injuries or things go wrong.
What I like is you've added two guys to to the locker room who are veteran guys. They've now been around college football for a while. And, beginning with JD Davis, the thing for me, we talked about it. If anything happened to Edgerrin Cooper, anything happened to Chris Russell, like you mentioned, there wasn't a whole lot behind them. And Marshall Harris is a guy that's now entering his second year on campus. And you feel like you have a two deep now of guys that have been in college for a year and have some experience. And the way Torian York and Damian Sanford played during the spring and the praise that they kind of got it, you feel better about that room and guys that you can depend on and turn to if need be. And obviously Edgerrin Cooper and Chris Russell are kind of going to be your bell cows in that room, but I feel a little better about the depth. And let's give them credit. They were really plugging away at linebacker this entire transfer portal cycle. They tried for Mason Cobb, didn't get him, but have been continuing trying to evaluate and get guys. And you land on JD Davis, and they did address that position. And I think the same could be said for Joshua DeBerry. Look, it's a long season, and you never know what's going to happen. Injuries are going to happen. Guys are going to pop up, and nagging issues are going to happen. And so to have a guy like Joshua DeBerry that can probably play in a couple different spots and fill some holes, provide another veteran voice in that room with Tyreek Chappelle, Tony Grimes. I know they're really excited about what Bryce Anderson's going to do at that kind of nickel spot, but you have a guy that's been, as you mentioned, an all ACC performer. You start to feel better about that secondary group as well, and the depth that they've got there. And you mentioned that defensive line. I think you do hear a lot of guys kind of talk about that playing behind this group, and that it's going to make their lives a lot easier. And I think that's certainly the case for Joshua DeBerry. So going to be very interesting to kind of see how everything kind of shakes out, where guys go, and what that room looks like. But I think A&M's done some nice work on that side of the ball with now 4 transfers. When you look at Tony Grimes, Sam McCall, JD Davis, and Josh DeBerry, they've really added a lot of experience to that room. We're going to look at some more spring storylines after the break, including the play, as you mentioned, of that defensive line. So stay tuned. Welcome back into the Gig'em 24/7 Sports Podcast. I am Andrew Hattersley, joined by Carter Carls. Carter, we got to talk about this defensive line because I thought they were one of the big-time bright spots in the spring game, specifically the play of Walter Nolen. Just what sort of jump have you seen from him in year 2, and what do you think he's capable of?
Yeah, he had one of those plays. I like to call myself like an audible watcher of football.
Yeah.
Like I can't keep my mouth shut sometimes. I'm not like yapping, but like if there's a big play, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I won't keep that to myself. I'll go, whoa, And so like in the press box, that play where he just absolutely blew through the line and tackled Le'Veon Moss in the backfield, I was just like, whoa, that was something else. That is an athlete right there. And it was kind of the eye test matching what we saw on that play, because all throughout the spring, you see this guy moving around, and you're like, good gosh, a guy that big should not move that quickly. And, it's hard to judge a guy in the first year. I mean, think about all
Yeah.
the things that they're picking up, and the brain's moving too fast with all the things they've got to learn schematically. They're nervous, right? They're like, it's just hard to judge. And he's still got a lot of reps. He still, showed flashes, but like, this is where I felt like, okay, yeah, this guy, that's the number 2 overall player in that 2022 class. And, he won defensive most improved player for the Aggies in the spring. Another guy kind of like that was Shamar Turner. He won the defensive MVP. He was someone who, come on, like, he's a defensive tackle. Like, we can just say it. Like,
Yeah.
300 pounds, not a defensive end. He's a defensive tackle. I know A&M loves to play guys all around. DeMarvin Leal, he was a defensive tackle, but, like, Kingsley Kiki, he's a defensive tackle. Like, Justin Adebike, defensive tackle, but they love to play him at the end. And so for
Mhm.
Shamar Turner, it was hard for him last year because he made a lot of, like, he was always there. He got like more pressures than anyone else on the team. He, was always around the quarterback, but at 300 pounds, he wasn't quite fast enough to get to the quarterback and get those sacks. He only finished the year with half a sack, but this time around, you watch him in that scrimmage and you think, you know what? Like, gosh, am I an idiot, or could this guy actually play defensive end?
Yeah.
Because, where they're at with their defensive ends, you may think that he's the best option. I don't know if LT Overton is better than him right now. So I kind of like the idea. I can kind of buy into it. And, maybe in a 3-man front, you like him, and that defensive end spot. So it's kind of like, okay, like, I can kind of buy into it. So I thought he showed a lot of flashes as far as being a little bit more nimble, a lot more faster, a lot more athletic. And there was other guys that flashed too. Shamar Stewart had a couple plays here and there. Even the backups, I thought Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy had himself a pretty nice scrimmage. So overall, a pretty impressive showing from the group. The one disclaimer, though, is, all right, guys, they're down their left tackle. They're down their right
Mhm.
tackle. They didn't have to actually sack the quarterback. Like, those weren't counted. They weren't allowed to sack the quarterback. So we couldn't see them finish a play and wrap up the quarterback. So you couldn't judge that as much. And then this offensive line is just not good. Like, so, I
Yeah.
mean, like, okay, let's see how these guys look against good offensive lines and healthy offensive lines. And then we can have a little bit of a better judgment. But I think just eye test and, hey, how do these guys look compared to last season? I think they showed you what you wanted to see.
No doubt. I think you've got another year of seasoning. You talk about guys like Walter Nolen. I mean, he was nicked up last fall as well, and kind of battling injuries. So the task for a lot of these guys is to stay healthy. Shamar Turner's had a little bit of that. Obviously, Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy was hurt last year as well. And so the key, if you can keep everybody healthy, and A&M can really achieve what they want to achieve about rotating guys and keeping guys fresh, I think you really have something here, and you have a lot of bodies to turn to. Obviously, DJ Hicks is going to arrive in the summer. You would imagine he's going to factor in as a freshman, and a guy that could be another one of those you talk about those favorites, right? The guys that can kind of move in and out. He was absolutely dominant at the Under Armour All-American game, at the Polynesian Bowl when he went there. And so you'd imagine he'd factor in as well. And then you got McKinley Jackson and Fidel Diggs as kind of those two veteran voices of the room. And so I think you do feel good about this. The one I agree with you on the offensive line. Everything kind of has to be taken with a grain of salt. I was interested to see what they would do with the offensive line and putting them obviously in black jerseys and doing that. I mean, that's one way to do it, but they they obviously were down a couple guys there. I did like what Walter Nolen did in the run game, especially, you mentioned that play. I think it was early in the second quarter when he had that play against Le'Veon Moss. And there were a
Mhm.
couple times right before that he was just impacting, forcing running backs to change directions because he was in the backfield and just so active. And if he can bring that forward to the fall, I think that goes a long way towards A&M solving some of their run issues. Do we think coming out of this that A&M has kind of taken a step towards solving some of those run issues, and or how much can we really know on that front?
I'm going with yes, just because they can't be much worse.
True.
And I do think that it only makes sense that they will take a step forward because all their other guys are a year older, and a lot of those guys
Yeah.
were pretty inexperienced. I mean, even Shamar Turner was only in his second year in college last year. So,
Yeah.
like guys like Shamar Stewart and Walter Nolan, um, and just having the continuity of the linebackers coming back, I think will help. Maybe having a guy like JD Davis who maybe you can move him around and do some things. So I think they'll be better just because they can't get much worse, but also because they're going to mature. I also think that the fact that DJ Durkin is now coaching the linebackers now, I think
I think
that
that's
could help
yeah.
the group. I mean, that group needed a lot of coaching and a lot of work. And I don't know if the last guy really inspired a lot of confidence that he's a great coach. So, like, I'm not trying to be mean here, but I'm just saying,
It's
like,
true.
that group never showed anything under him. And DJ Durkin is a guy who's been around for a long time and has a track record of developing guys and recruiting. So, hey, I think when you go from a guy that has never showed anything to a guy that has shown a lot as a coach, you would think that that would improve in that area. So everything just logically, I feel like makes sense toward them improving. Question is how much. It's hard for me to imagine that they'll go from 122nd in run defense to 22nd in run defense. Like
Yeah.
that doesn't happen very often, especially when you're returning a lot of the same personnel. But just not being a liability in that regard. They could be 60th, right? Like,
Yeah.
and maybe have a couple games in them where they overachieve. I think that's probably what you're wanting from this group this season.
No doubt, and you saw some of the impact, and I'll have another point on to your point about DJ Durkin and the linebackers, but you saw what a difference it made, right, with this defense when you look at when A&M was in third and long situations. Granted, it was a spring game. You saw them bring in Bryce Anderson off the edge and
Yep.
forcing the ball out of Connor Wigman's hands and getting Max Johnson off his spots and rushing some throws. And now suddenly, a ball that Anais Smith usually catches goes through his hands and you're punting. Just some of those, if they can get better at getting in down, they can put themselves in better position in down and distance situations. It's going to make a huge impact. And you mentioned, DJ Durkin coaching the linebackers. A&M did get some good news this week, and Tristan Jernigan,
Mhm.
a Tupelo, Mississippi linebacker, committing to Texas A&M early this week. One of the things when we talked a couple weeks ago, and he came off that visit to A&M for one of their spring practices, which I think really kind of sealed the deal for A&M. He said, "Listen, A&M is going to be in my top 3 for sure." Like,
Mhm.
didn't want to mention anything about the other 2 schools, but said A&M will be in my top 3 for sure. And we got talking about DJ Durkin coaching the linebackers, and he said that's a big reason why. That's one of the reasons that A&M is going to be in my top 3 is because I I love the fact that the
Recruits
defensive
love
coordinator
them.
recruits love him, and they love the
Yeah.
fact that he's working with the linebackers. And so, I think it could help linebacker recruiting, which ultimately will lead to better results. You would think down the road as well, but recruits love him. They're in the mix for a lot of them this cycle, and so I think it could ultimately be a positive. And if that group can take a step up and play a little better, I think that'll also, like you mentioned, go a long way towards A&M improving their run defense, which was probably one of the top priorities this offseason was to get better in run defense because, teams didn't have to pass on them last year. They really didn't have to. They could control possessions, what Appalachian State did to them. You look at that Ole Miss game, they were right there, and Quinshon Judkins breaks off that big run, which was just a total backbreaker. They just couldn't stop the run last year. And so I do think guys being a year older along the defensive line, a little better linebacker play, and they can get that figured out pretty quickly. What are some of the big things, just real quick, looking at this defense, what are some of the big things that you're kind of looking at now heading into fall camp as we kind of turn the page towards that?
Well, we didn't get a chance to look at the cornerbacks too
Mm.
much in the spring game. It was basically Sam McCall and a bunch of who's that
Yeah.
guys. There were a lot of checking the depth chart. Okay, 42 is this guy, and I think I just want to know. Okay, Tony Grimes, a lot of experience, former 5-star recruit. How good is he? 2 years ago, second team All ACC, I think, according to Pro Football Focus. Um, can he be an All SEC corner? And then Tyreek Chappelle, we know he missed some practices this spring. Uh, is everything good there? And can he live up to what we think he can live up to? Jalen Jones was. I think he was a solid player, but I don't know if he was like ultra elite. And I
Yeah.
wonder if the cornerback group could actually take a step up this year, especially when you have Bryce Anderson, who I think, I'm not going to say he's going to be better than Antonio Johnson this year, but just projecting where he could be by the time his career is done here, I think he could be one of the more special DBs that A&M's had. And
Yeah.
then you've got guys like Josh DeBerry in the room as well. I just feel like I still want to see them, but I do feel good about the DB group. So
Yeah.
there's that. I guess we want to talk offense too, just overall questions with them.
Yeah. What questions do you have offensively?
Yeah, we still don't fully know about Petrino and what the offense will look
Mm.
like. And we heard from Max Wright, like, yeah, man, there's all this pre-snap motion and all this and all these bag of tricks, and they weren't obviously going to show us that in the spring game. So again, that's always my whole thing with Petrino has been no one will know for sure until the
Yep.
ball snapped game one. So that will be a question that's not answered until September. They've called it a quarterback competition with Connor Wigman, Max Johnson. It's been hard for me to believe that. I just feel like Connor Wigman gives you a better chance to win now and later. But you look at that spring game, and it was an opportunity for him to really show, like, hey, I'm way better, and I'm the future, and all this. And he didn't really show that. And that's not me saying, oh man, this guy stinks or this guy doesn't have it in him. I
Yeah.
think he was down a bunch of receivers, and spring games are just always a mirage, really. You have to take some stock into it, but you can't put all your stock into it. And so, I still think he has to prove himself and didn't quite do that this spring. And so we'll see how soon in the preseason camp he does that. And then offensive line, I mean, that's the group that to me I am the least confident in. I'd be shocked if they're even average this upcoming season. Not only because I have questions with their depth, but I've got questions about their starters, and I've got questions about how they're being coached. I mean, I just all around where you look at this O line, it's hard to feel good about anything really right now. And I'm not trying to be all doom and gloom. Like I think the offense has a lot to be optimistic about. Receivers are freaking awesome. Running backs are freaking awesome. Donovan Green, freaking awesome. And Connor Wigman has the potential to be freaking awesome. But this
Yeah.
offensive line, man, it's they have a lot of work to do before they can show me that they can at least be average this season.
No doubt. And that I think is why it's so important to get Bryce Foster back in the fold and see what kind of difference he makes as a healthy center and obviously getting Ruben Fothery and Trey Zune going as well. You hope that those are kind of the pieces that help this offensive line gel, because it's no doubt it's going to be one of the biggest questions. They were bad all of last year, and it really, I think, it didn't give the quarterbacks much of a chance at times either. They were having to deal with bad snaps. They were under pressure constantly. They were getting hit. Couldn't get the running
Always
game
injured.
going. Always
They're always
injured.
hurt.
Couldn't
Yeah.
couldn't get the running game going a lot of the times because of just not being able to get movement up front. And so I agree with you. It's one of the biggest questions, and will be until the season starts. So a lot of fun getting back into it. We're going to have more, obviously, to dive into. We'll be back next week to talk a little more about the offense. We'll kind of an overarching view there as well at that quarterback position, at the receivers, and some storylines heading into the summer as well. But thanks again for joining us, and be sure to give us a like and a share on YouTube. And follow us on Spotify and iTunes as well, to get a notification every time a new podcast drops. And until then, we'll see you guys soon.